New York City has elected a Muslim socialist mayor who wants to tax New Yorkers based on their race and who also has connections with radical Islam and anti-Americanism. Sean Notley is a visiting fellow at the Danube Institute and a former director of the Trump campaign. Welcome to Riks, Sean.
Thank you for having me.
Now, New York City has been the ground zero in the war between Islam and the West for, since the 9/11 attacks, obviously. But how did they come around to electing a person like Zohran Mamdani, who is, campaigned on his Muslim identity in the mayoral election?
Well, honestly, that played in his favor very well amongst the voters in New York. And the reason that we are having, candidates arising from the Democrats who are more radical in their leanings, especially more, socialist, is because the structure of the Democratic Party as it stands. Most people don't really understand this issue, but the Democratic Party has changed itself to be a completely top-down structure to where all power is basically centralized around the big money donors, the elites who help fund and make the machine run. They're the ones who get to have the ultimate say on who the candidates for the Democratic Party are. So if you're a quality candidate who has good political skills in the Democratic Party and you aren't part of the old boys club, you're going to really struggle to be able to make yourself known and to become, a Democratic candidate. So what people have done successfully, like AOC, like Mamdani, is they capture the media by going extremely far to the left, getting that media coverage, and they're able to break out and become a candidate. I knew Mamdani was going to win this election and that he was going to be the candidate of the Democratic Party when he had that debate with Cuomo and all the others who were vying for the Democratic nominee, when he had that amazing breakout moment where people were asked, where's your first foreign trip going to be when you become mayor of New York City? Everyone else there had their answer ready to please the Democratic donors, and Mamdani, as the outsider, came out and just said, hey, why am I talking about a foreign trip as mayor of New York City? It was exactly the right answer, and that is exactly the reason why he is the mayor-elect of New York right now.
There's a lot of information about Zohran Mamdani's imam, based in Brooklyn, Siraj Vahai, that has circulated social media. And among other things, he has called for a jihad. He has glorified dying in Islamic jihad. He has called the United States a filthy and sick country. And he has also said, apparently, that politics is a weapon in the name of Islam. You can also couple that with Zohran Mamdani's anti-white rhetoric in many cases. So how have these things not impacted his performance in this election?
Well, it absolutely would not impact his performance in the election. And for the reason quite clearly is that the Democratic voters felt that he was the only sort of real choice that they had. I mean, Cuomo has the personality of a stale piece of bread and was giving party-fed answers at debates, whereas Mamdani was actually giving answers that, the people wanted to hear. He is by far a better politician and quality candidate than anything else that the Democrats were able to field. That's not to support his policies and what he says. That's just recognition of political acumen. And things like, having an imam with those comments, that might actually work in his favor. It gives him a talking point to where he can decry racism, saying that there were rumors spread against him, saying that he's a victim, common stereotypes and plays the Democratic Party usually uses in these sorts of races. So all of that actually worked in his favor because he's able to just stand on television saying that he's being persecuted for X, Y, and Z because things that his imam said, and, Democrat voters drink it up.
He's running on a very socialist and populist program, obviously. And Democrats are usually quite wary of fielding socialist candidates of this type. Do you think that we will see more socialist candidates on Democratic tickets following Mamdani's success?
Absolutely, I do think we are. And for the reasons that I've told you, the structure of the Democratic Party has totally incentivized people breaking away, going as far to the left as possible in order to get political success. I mean, that's what you have to do as someone who's not part of the old boys club, really. And let me just stress, because I know this is primarily for a Swedish audience, the socialism that we're talking about here is not what you have in Sweden whatsoever. What we're talking about are policies where, you know, government actually takes ownership of certain businesses and ventures, where government literally will own grocery stores, where government will increase tax rates to such a high extent that it's not reflective of the market economy, to where all these plans are being made, but there's no real infrastructure being made on how to pay for any of these plans. You can look at reports from the Cato Institute. You can look at people on even the Democrat side of the aisle. The math does not add up for a lot of these policies, but it doesn't matter. They're popular policies. And we're going to see a continued rise going in that direction. And going into, you know, 2027, the midterm elections, I would not be surprised if we saw a lot more charismatic younger folks stepping up, pursuing these platforms. In a recent Pew study, a Pew poll done in 2022, it showed that when 18 to 29-year-old voters in the United States were asked, you know, what would they rather have, socialism or capitalism? You know, we had an overwhelming majority say they would rather have socialism. And in that same Pew survey, we have that 33% of Democrats had a better perception of politicians who describe themselves as democratic socialists over just traditional Democrats. This has been an ongoing trend for years in the United States.
Concerning the popularity of socialism among some voters, what do you think should be the Republican, and/or MAGA response to these types of attitudes that are sweeping the electorate right now? Like, what is the option to socialism then that MAGA can offer them?
Well, that option is quite clear. It's MAGA itself. Most people do not realize, and the Democrats have done a really good job at misrepresenting what MAGA really is. Really, MAGA is probably the most, inclusive Republican platform we've had for years. As someone who worked on the Trump campaign, was a director whose job was to try to get Democrat support for President Trump going into these blue districts like DeKalb County, Georgia, Alexandria, Virginia. The MAGA movement has incorporated so many of policies that, a centrist Democrat would have supported back in the year 2000, and they simply don't do it now because they vote blue no matter who. The proper response should be just to put forward the policies, put forward the facts, and continue engaging people the way that they were successfully able to do in 2024. One of the reasons we were very successful is because the Trump campaign hired a whole team of guys like me who would go into the blue areas and say, hey, I work for the Trump campaign, ask me anything, let's have a conversation. That's something you really don't see engagement from on the left, or especially those who go and skew that far to the left. Everyone's always asking me, with my track record, I've run political campaigns in 30 states, 7 on the ground, and I consulted in the rest. Everyone's always asking me, what's the secret to flipping a Democrat district to a Republican district? The real secret is just have the facts and be willing to have a reasonable conversation with someone. That's all that it takes. And I do believe that, if we follow the same models that we employed in the 2024 presidential election, then we can win the midterm election. We just need to get all the candidates down ballot to emulate.
Do you think that a MAGA candidate of sorts would have done better in New York City than what, for example, the Republican candidate Curtis Sliwa did?
So I think we have the issue of timing here. Now we have right now the government shutdown going on. It is now currently the longest U.S. government shutdown in history. We are in day 36. The previous record was 35 days when the government was shut down in 2019. So the Democrats have masterfully and successfully controlled the messaging around the shutdown to blame the Republicans for this. And this is why we're seeing such big wins yesterday for the Democratic Party in winning the New Jersey gubernatorial race, winning the Virginia gubernatorial race, which I was more hopeful for, but unfortunately we lost that one. And then having Mamdani. It's been a master play, you know, acting and delaying in the Senate, you know, keeping the government shut down, putting the arguments to the American people saying, hey, look, Republicans control the House, Republicans control the Senate, Republicans control the White House. The government shut down because of them, not us. It's been a masterful play on their part, even though reality shows that they're the ones that have been delaying things. They've been delaying meetings. They've been completely unwilling to negotiate in good faith, as Speaker of the House Mike Johnson has repeatedly said. So we've had that issue of timing, and timing is everything in an election. I've worked on Republican campaigns in states like West Virginia, where, you know, there's just that one news event that can completely destroy a campaign's momentum. So while a MAGA candidate might arguably have done a little bit better, I think with the timing and the public perceptions of the government shutdown, we were going to see, you know, a Democrat-leaning person win this race. Not to say that MAGA hasn't made significant gains in New York. As a result of the 2024 presidential election, you know, we were seeing some places, some of the boroughs in New York even grow substantially in favor of Republicans. While it wasn't good enough to help get a Republican elected mayor of New York City, I would pay close attention to the New York gubernatorial races, because it's more competitive now than ever.
I personally think that the demographic changes of New York City also helped Zohran Mamdani actually win this election for various reasons. You have a number of people from foreign countries. There are illegal migrants living there. They might be voting. Who knows? Absolutely. Who knows if they don't? Do you see a future for traditional American conservatism and patriotism in New York City for the foreseeable future with these facts?
Well, the Republicans of New York City aren't going to go anywhere. They're still going at it strong. They're still fielding candidates, and that's a lot better than some Republican chapters I've dealt with in other areas of the country. For example, in Alexandria, Virginia, a place where I used to live and work near D.C., the Republicans there in Fairfax County, they had completely given up, and they would even sometimes not even field a candidate for a state house seat or a state senate seat. The fact that the Republicans in New York are still fielding candidates for all the offices that are up for election means that they are there. They're not going to let themselves be downtrodden upon, and they're going to develop a strategy and try to grow. Now, whether that is ultimately successful, we don't know. Personally, I believe that after the tenure of Mamdani, we're going to see Republican growth. As if you just take a look at Mamdani's policies, I have them up right here, from rent freezes to fare-free cities, having government-run grocery stores in all the boroughs. We've seen policies like these implemented in California, and statistics show that after they've implemented these sort of policies, especially on increasing taxes on upper income households, we saw that California's tax revenue shrank by 45% in the first year and 61% after 2 years of these policies. Mamdani's really pushing this $1 million tax, where he's been unclear on whether he's just increasing taxes of people on income after $1 million or across the board up to $1 million. In his speeches, he's been, sometimes like, no, it's just after $1 million for a business. And then other times he says, well, if someone makes $1 million, we're going to ask them for $20,000 in taxes, in additional taxes, to be paid for the city of New York. So after we have Mamdani's policies put into place, I do think people will be able to see that they're a bad idea, and we'll have Republican growth in New York.
Do you predict a Republican comeback after the potential failure for Zohran Mamdani's plans?
I predict at the very bare minimum, at least, a return to a centrist Democrat, but you never know the future. I mean, people in 2016 said President Trump would never become president. Still won.
So there are obviously, though, still a lot of problems in New York City connected to affordability, and that is what Zohran Mamdani, ultimately won the election on, probably. Do you have any alternative proposals as to how to actually solve the crisis that New York City is undergoing? I mean, people are attracted to socialism for this reason. They believe that this will actually solve their problems. What do you have as an option?
Well, first of all, we need to look at the underlying causes of what has caused the rise in prices for the cost of living, for food, for rent in particular. And, I hate to say it, it's government spending in New York. New York City has a budget of, I believe, $133 billion right now. It's just a phenomenal amount of money. And it's just being spent on frivolous things. It's being spent on, electric chargers for electric buses that never get delivered. If I were the mayor of New York and I'm trying to figure out, how are we going to fix this, I would focus on making sure that people are able to keep most of the money that they make so that they have the money to spend on rent, on food and stuff. The primary vehicle or the primary solution can never be just government taxing everything, especially when they don't provide a clear plan with real statistics on we can afford to increase taxes on this because there's been market growth in this area. Mamdani's plan does not reflect the reality of the economy of New York. I mean, when he says that he wants a $30 minimum wage, that sounds great on paper, but that's not really where the minimum wage should be in New York City. Remember, all the economies are different throughout the United States. So I would take a look and talk with some real economists to see what's going on, what can realistically the government do to get out of the way of people's prosperity, and see what policies would be needed, and not just make grandstanding, claims like, oh, once we're in power, we'll fix everything. That's just not reflective of reality.
Thank you, Sean Notoli, for your comments and insights.
No problem.
Tack för att ni tittar på Riks.